You didn't know that this was like one of those Tom Brokaw type interviews,
Well, it's the microphone.
right? That'll do it. So I want to start with the path that led you to Gustamo Group. Like, where were you before, and how was this the next logical step?
Frankly, like Gustamo Group's pretty much the only job I've ever had. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. My dad was a pastor, kind of moved every 2 to 3 years up and down the East Coast, was always kind of a little bit of a troublemaker. So when I went to college, my parents were like, you really got to stay within 3 hours. So, but the options really weren't that bad growing up in Augusta. So I made my way to College of Charleston. Went to school from like 2005 to 2009. I mean, just fell in love with that city. To this day, it's just one of my favorite places on earth. Graduated in 2009. Grew up kind of with a love of whitewater kayaking, and I had the opportunity to ski a little bit growing up. So I was like, I got to move out west. Heart of the Great Recession. Nobody knew what they were going to do. I had definitely no clue what I was going to do. So I was like, well, I'm moving west, but it felt like an easier sell to tell my parents I was going to go get an MBA and ski 100 days than it was to say I'm going to go ski 100 days. So made the move. Second I graduated, came out to Colorado, spent 2 years at the University of Denver getting an MBA. All the while during that time, I was like, I love skiing. I love the outdoors. How can I turn that into a career? I mean, I had a job with Deuter Backpacks doing an internship, but very, very quickly realized there's not a lot of opportunity in the outdoor industry. And it's probably the only industry that's more challenging than the hospitality industry. The only difference, instead of, unlimited tacos, you've got like unlimited pairs of skis. And I was looking at myself and I'm like, dude, I've got like 30 backpacks. Like I can't have any more backpacks for different functions. So I was graduating, no clue. And ended up getting a job at Hillstone serving tables. First time ever working in a restaurant. And it was funny getting a job at Hillstone. They hire based upon personality. They don't hire based on experience. So I was able to make my way in and got unbelievable training. And, from my perception at that time, I didn't have any money to eat. So I had never really experienced hospitality. So I was just under the assumption, I'm like, well, this is how every restaurant operates, right? Like this is just a normal neighborhood restaurant. I didn't realize that like this is one of the greatest operators that has ever lived. And
In the history of man.
Yeah, like it's just
my God.
So I was serving tables there. Anyway, I remember biking home one night, finishing, serving tables, second year of grad school, passed by this 40-seat little burger joint, Park Burger. Went inside, and I think Hillstone, I understood like the operational flow, 3-hand carries, why certain systems are more efficient, but then I went into this little 40-seat burger restaurant, which my partner today opened his first store on his own. And I just sat at the bar, didn't have any money at the time, but it was the first time where I really fell in love with the concept of hospitality, really price point is irrelevant to a certain extent. And I looked to my left and my right, and I saw like families just smiling. The music was at the right tone. And I was like, this is it. This is the magic. I applied there the next day, got a job serving tables at Park Burger. But very, very quickly, I realized that Park Burger, this 40-seat burger restaurant, didn't have the systems that Hillstone had. And I was like, this place is chaos, dude. Like, I don't think that guy washed his hands. Like, that person's drunk, So I went, I was like, I can't work here. I got to go find somewhere else. But I was like, I feel really bad. Here are 50 things I would implement. Like, you got some work to do. I wish you the best of luck. And Jean-Philippe called me back and he's like, hey, how about you become the manager here and try to implement this stuff? I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to be in the outdoor industry. I'll give it a roll. So that was literally how I got into hospitality. Came on to just to be a, general manager at this little 40-seat burger joint. And, that expanded, opened up additional locations. And then very quickly, I, saw that, the wide breadth of skill really necessary to be successful in the hospitality industry. And we had no money at the time. So it's like, the biggest lesson that I think we've all taken from this is like the most bootstrapped organization can beat the most, financially viable organization and, or financially successful organization every single day just by being gritty. So back then, no marketing budget. I was doing graphic design in Indonesia through crowdsourcing, We didn't have any architecture budget. I was calling up my buddies in architecture school, and we were drinking beers and drawing designs and figuring out how the hell we were going to build this without any money. But through that, just developed such an incredible skill set. So continued to grow. It wasn't until we found a location close to a Park Burger that we were like, we know the real estate's great, but it's too close to be a Park Burger, that we really discovered that Gustamo Group was going to be a multi-concept operator. And that first brand was Homegrown. Homegrown was really the first brand where my partner, Jean-Philippe, was the culinary mind. And I really fell in love with the idea of concepting, like, what's the storyboard? Like, what are we trying to tell? What are we trying to make guests feel? And just became obsessed with that, right? And just through imagery, architecture, sound, uniforms, like the menu, I just became obsessed with the details. I've never been a culinary guy, like legitimately can't cook. I was thinking about it today. I think I've cooked less than like 100 meals in my life. But I love the details of these restaurants. So just to finish up quick, we ended up scaling Homegrown brand. We're actually about to open 4, 5, and 6 this year. And then it led to the creation of a brand called Bird Call. It was kind of, I guess it was like 2016, 2017. I was in California doing the Escape from Alcatraz and just walked into this concept called Itza. And you remember Itza, Josh?
I do. I do.
Yeah. I looked at Itza and I was like, wait a minute, it's getting more expensive to build these from a hard construction standpoint. And look at how they're solving for the operational challenges. It's like, is this the future? Is this the answer to solving how do you increase quality while decreasing price? And got obsessed. And, the only thing I knew about starting a tech startup to that date was season 1 and 2 of Silicon Valley. But like literally jumped the plane to San Francisco and started knocking on doors. And I was like, yeah, I want to replicate what they got going on at Pizza, a little chicken shop in Denver. And, crazy story, endless lessons. And we're still building today. Bird Call was one. We actually raised growth equity and took outside of our Gustamo Group. But my focus today is really, I'm becoming really, really bullish on just suburban casual dining across the country, and just everything that COVID did, as well as that massive, transformation from the 90s of functional dining to experiential dining. And experiential dining, it doesn't have a price point associated with it. So there's incredible things that people can do to really increase the value proposition through that type of work. But yeah, that's kind of how I got my start. So still get to ski, but the hospitality is my day job.
Do you see greater segmentation? I was just having this conversation earlier this week with Chris Hall, and he was saying, that he sees it as there are going to be transactional businesses, right, where there's very little hospitality, and then there's going to be experiential hospitality businesses, and the middle is ultimately what's going to get squeezed.
Yeah, I learned a lot on the Bird Call concept, right? Because historically we were primarily driven at full service experiences, right? Where, like you and I can walk into a boutique hotel. We can kind of get an idea of the picture they're trying to paint. But we don't feel the energy until we stay there. It doesn't become, and so I think one thing I didn't consider early on was like, there's a certain amount of time for a time of a dining experience for you to actually feel and embrace the experiential dining, or, and maybe that, and I think that was one of my bigger mistakes on early in the Bird Call days, is I was so focused. I had to build the most beautiful restaurant, but in all reality, the quality of the food was a higher priority because it was a convenience item. It was like, how can I get, something with the quality similar to Sweet Green or whatever in my neighborhood, and feed an entire family with different dining preferences. So, but now I look at it and I'm like, well, completely believe in experiential dining, but I do think it's going to be segmented that way, right? Like it's either like this is a purely functional dish, or this is which is price is such a a huge component of that, and then this is an experience. This is a supplement for going on vacation. This is what we're going to do on Saturday. This is an activity, and I think where I realize I want to spend the rest of my career is like, I don't want to compete in the functional space. I want to compete in the space where the magic lives. And I can use the skill set built over the last 15, 20 years of creating experiences versus like, man, like, I don't know how I could ever beat, McDonald's or Burger King or Chick-fil-A. And, that's why there's a much more equipped person leading bird call this day is I don't know how to compete as much on function, but I do believe that there's a really awesome opportunity to compete on experience. And I think that's where like small restaurants have the ability. I mean, you've seen it, right? It's why there's such a deep love of community-driven restaurants in urban cores, right? But I think that's going to transfer to these great suburban markets as well.
Your role is chief vision officer, which I would assume a core function of that is focus, right? And if you were to ask me what I think is one of the most foundational issues within our industry, at least as it relates to founders, it is focus. So how would you describe your role as chief vision officer?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of a made up title. I do think my partner and I really just figure out how to drive the organization together. But I think focus, I mean, the hardest part of being an entrepreneur is focus. I mean, even this summer was the first time, went to spend 3 days of an offsite with an executive coach on like, dude, and I just remember him being this just perfect mirror of like, what are you doing? Looking at all the different ideas, the different businesses, the different, and he was such a good reflection being like, you're generating a lot and you're doing a lot, but you're producing very, very little. And I think, coming back from that trip, I'm like, we can't, you've talked about it before on your show. It's like so hard to be a multi-concept operator. And it's like, really, what is the future of Gustamo Group and how do we laser the focus? We can't compete in all cuisines, and homegrown's really, really working. So I think historically, like, I think that's been a detriment to the organization. Like, I've started music fests and charity golf tournaments, and I think last year was just a real thing. I'm like, God, I'm doing all of this to stay busy, and maybe these are personal medals, but they're not team wins, and I need to cut this shit out. So I think I would say some of this is actually really, really new. This kind of renewed focus of being like, gosh, if we believe that we can disrupt suburban casual dining, then that's the only thing that we need to do. And we need to pick one, maybe two brands to go do it with. So historically, you can ask anyone on the team, they're like, dude, Pizza Tornado, heaven only knows what he's gonna say or where we're gonna go and what business we're gonna be in. And I think, pivoting is an important function of an organization, right? Park Burger, where we started, was never going to be the end. But we've got to, if something's working, we've got to push down that path.
Well, let's talk about that because it's, what does Stephen Covey say? He says that, the goal is to keep the main thing the main thing. And then the only other thing to worry about is to remind yourself that the main thing is the main thing. Which is fabulous advice. But I think in order to be able to do that successfully, especially when like you guys have reached a level of success where the phone rings, right? So some of it is about the ideas that you dream up, and some of it is about the phone rings and, hey, I've got this great opportunity. And then you have to have the lens to determine whether it's an opportunity or a distraction. So like, what is that lens for you when with your own ideas, with the opportunities that are presented to you? How do you figure out what's worth doing?
Yeah, and I think that lens is drastically, it's like, it's a miracle that our organization's still alive today, right? It's like, dude, it's like a miracle any restaurant is, right?
Sure,
Because when you think of all of those growth hurdles, and I mean, so that lens is drastically different today than it was when I first started, right? Because when you're a young entrepreneur, you're like, every deal is the last deal I'm going to see. If I don't do this, I'm not going to have an opportunity. If I don't do this, I'm not going to reach the next stage. And so you're pushed into doing bad deals, and X, Y, and Z occurs. Luckily, we had some great performing restaurants that kept it afloat for some of the the poor performing restaurants. So the original lens was, it was like someone would show us a piece of real estate. We'd be like, yeah, it looks pretty good. It's in the city of Denver, and who cares what we put in there? We'll figure it out along the way. But the lens could completely change, because ultimately you can have some, you can find some acorns and you can facilitate some growth, but you're never going to get to scale that way. And I think during my time as the CEO at Bird Call, having the opportunity to work with a formal board, it was an incredible opportunity to to learn the type of lens that I needed to have moving forward, especially as I came back to our Gustamo Group and focused on this thesis of suburban casual dining. So our lens is I mean, like our underwriting, we have to put almost the most work into the underwriting of a new store, right? And I think, how tight these margins are, how challenging this business is. And if you're not getting a 3-year payback on the restaurant investment, you're not going to get anyone to invest in the future of the brand. And it's okay if this one does 2 years and this one does 5, but the overall theme has to be like, you're opening restaurants that are paying back investors. And I think when we started, it was our own capital, costs were drastically less. And we were like, screw it, take the risk, bet on it. We'll figure it out along the way. Like when we opened Bird Call, craziest decision. I was like, well, we have 600 grand. Why don't we start a tech startup with 300 and build a restaurant with 300? That seems completely logical.
How hard could that possibly be?
Hey, let's not even worry about, maintenance of this software. Dude, So I think now it's like, it really comes down to the underwriting. And as you know, the whole market has shifted, right? Prior to COVID, the only thing people thought about was like, how is your revenue? Because we can solve for margin. And now post COVID, we're in a world of like margin's the only thing that matters. Like, I want to invest in a sustainable business that's sustainable today and it'll be even more sustainable tomorrow. So huge shifts internally as far as like how we're going to build our business and focusing on longevity. And in the end of the day, like when you're a young entrepreneur, you're focused on speed. You're like, how do I scale faster? But like the people we love, the mentors we adore, their businesses were built over decades. Like I still love reading about Chick-fil-A, and it's like, when you see, like, you can't compete with Chick-fil-A irrelevant how much money you have, right? They have processes, skills, culture built over 40, 50 years. And, I look at Texas, for me, the one I'm obsessed is with Texas Roadhouse, right? And
everyone, right? It's amazing.
So it's like, so we don't have to build a I think, later in life, it's like, we don't have to build a hospitality group overnight. We got to focus making good bets, building it thoughtfully. And because we made those mistakes, we feeling those pain, I don't know if that helps you or answers the question.
It does. One of the paradigm shifts in my own career, probably the biggest, was joining EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. It was the first time I had ever been exposed to entrepreneurs in an intimate way outside of my industry. And my mind was blown. It was just an entirely different worldview for me. And you're a member of YPO. Talk to me about the experience of being in our industry and then joining a peer organization that gives you a window into every other industry.
Yeah, I mean, a gentleman here who used to help us from the marketing standpoint introduced the concept of EO to me, and eventually through that was networked and met the Young Presidents Organization. And I mean, it is, in my life, it's been transformative, right? And on the Gustamo Group side, we're trying to build a hospitality development company. We're actually trying to purchase the real estate where we operate restaurants. And, having an organization like YPO, where I've basically got a board of some of the most successful developers, not only in Denver, but across the country, that I can run my thesis by. And, basically with the concept of like, can you build a hospitality development company that uses restaurant cash flow to inflate the IRR? And if you can, well, then holy smokes, think about what you can do from a scale perspective, because your return profile will be higher, but you'll also decrease the downside risk. So YPO has just been incredible for me to sit down with these people who are doing complex, $500 million deals. And I'm like, but yeah, help me understand how I can apply it to this $5 million deal and Parker. Because going back to what you talked about before, as far as being thoughtful on the due diligence, the underwriting, I mean, it's like you can buy real estate in the hospitality industry and miss on the development side because there's so much generated cash flow. But think what happens if you can win on the development side and win on the hospitality side. At least you have room for error to be like, I slightly missed on one or the other. So from a development standpoint, from engaging with other leaders, by just irrelevant of if it's YPO or EO, just a big believer in surrounding yourself with people who want to be high performers, people who are focused on constant improvement, people that can hold you accountable, people who can provide an alternative lens. I mean, the education outside of your industry. I mean, without a doubt, as a young restaurant builder, the biggest issue I had is I was so internal focused. I was like, I didn't give a shit what you guys were doing out in the rest of the world. All I
Sure.
cared about what we're doing within these four walls. But when you open your eyes to being like, well, wait a minute, how are other restaurant operators are doing this? Wait a minute, how are other people selecting and underwriting due diligence and deals and so on? Um, so so yeah, YPO is, and the other thing too, I think the hospitality industry is just hard from building community. I mean, you're in the restaurant all day. You want to give your team a break, and it is a very lonely career. And so I think finding other ways to build that level of community and build that support structure. It's the difference between making it through challenging times and not, right? So big proponent for any of those organizations in what they can do. And I also believe in this idea. I mean, you rise to the median of the people that you surround yourself with. So it's like, and I've got some great buddies, but like, I really want to surround myself with great leaders because I want to be a great leader. I need to let go of this young, weird, radical ski bum entrepreneur and transform into a world-class leader who can execute on a very focused vision. And so that organization has been super special for things like that, for sure.
I so vividly remember. So, coming up in the industry, there's all of this bullshit you attach to, right? All of these maxims that have proven out to be true mainly because people believe them. So then it happens. I remember sitting in one of my first forum meetings, and I was explaining to, again, 6 other professionals that were wildly more successful than me. And I was like, you've got to understand that like the hospitality industry has different rules, that like they're fundamentals of this business that don't apply to any other industry. And like 6 people simultaneously that were all successful in different industries in their own right looked at me like I was a crazy person. And then they like laid out, they explained, they were like, yo, bring in your P&Ls. And we did. And they were like, this is your problem. Like, you need to drop that and understand that business is business is business. And when you begin focusing on these levers and you do these things and that thing, it all changes. And they were 100% right. But it would have been hard to take the information had it not been so many people telling me, I was foolish in the kindest way imaginable, all at the same time. So in the way that it broke my worldview and then helped me recraft it in a way that was far more realistic was super valuable as well.
Well, in it,
It,
like the hardest thing in the hospitality restaurant is just building that humility, right? And after you're broken down enough, you're like, fuck, this is hard. Like,
yeah.
and so, but if you do break down that, I think you have the ability to learn and grow. I mean, I guess the only other takeaway from EO and YPO is like, how did I, out of all the industries in the world, how did I pick restaurants? But it's so magical. But I keep
It
telling
is.
myself, it's just, seeing the power of magic is what holds you on if you believe in it.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I also think that, it's the money is great, but it's also about impact. And there are a few industries that are able to create more impact in individuals and in communities than ours. And, we're seeing impact today. There's massive disruption in the industry at large. Article after article coming out talking about how this technology and AI, that it's all going to disrupt our industry. And I'm going to quote you to you because that's fun. And you said of disruption that authenticity is the solution. And you said, to quote you, I think the concept of, dude, this is my real soul, this is who I really am, is going to make me more relevant than ever because everything is going to be so perfect. I'd argue that most independents feel that way, but how can they make it translate effectively to the customer? And so I would ask you, answer your own question, Peter Newlin. How do you make authenticity translate effectively to the customer?
I mean, I think through the details. I mean, we're such a firm believer in the details make the difference in dining, And just focusing on every different layer of that experience, that customer experience, what is the entire user flow? I mean, the breadth of skills needed to be successful in the hospitality industry is insane. Now, I am a big believer that AI is going to allow smaller restaurant groups to have the skills and tools necessary to compete against some of the biggest organizations in the world. I'm actually really excited for that disruption. But taking into consideration every aspect of that diner experience from their first interaction with the brand to all the way until they pay their check. You know, it's so easy as you start to scale. It's like it gets harder as you see, it gets harder and harder to compete with a single restaurant that has the owner operator in the store every day, listening to customers, what they're saying, and making changes the next day. I mean, there's a restaurant across from the original Park Burger, Platt Park Brewery, and I'm always reminded of how incredible they are. Every day you go in and they're adapting, they're growing, and they're modifying their experience based on what the guest needs. So staying grounded to the store level and just making sure you have a very, very good clarity to what people are saying. But every detail makes a difference. And for me, that's looking at everything from the UX UI on the website all the way, every single digital touch point. What does the graphic design look like? Is that brand story clear all the way through to training materials? So the team actually has clarity to what the brand represents and what it's trying to tell. And so I do think for a lot of my career, I've been distracted and I've been focused on doing the next best thing. And, and maybe if I layer in enough new shit, that then it'll offset not being good at one thing. But, the Jiro dreams of sushi, right? There's a reason why we opened the first restaurant in Whole Foods, an executive from Whole Foods is like, watch this movie, come back and tell me what it means. And so I'm hoping this next phase of Gustamo Group and of my career will be like, dude, we need to own every detail. If we have the obsession that they do at Chick-fil-A in our restaurant in the middle of Westminster or Parker, Colorado, with every detail, then it's not we need to stop worrying about what growth and what doors will open. The doors will open. So it's a huge, I think for me, it's a big focus shift. And the cool thing about it is, if you take a step back, you sit in your store, you'll see the layer after layer that you can bring into that dining experience to make it better. This isn't rocket science. It's just, we want to get distracted and do the next high level thing. This industry isn't about doing the next high level thing. It's about operating every single day and growing as a team and executing on all those moments and creating those powerful moments, man. When we first opened restaurants and a guest had a bad experience, or I saw a guest turn the door and walk out, I would chase that guest down the way. I remember walking guests to cars with umbrellas, and if I'm not sharing that and that as a priority, then how do you learn that? So yeah.
I agree with you. I think that it's a massive drawback to be at a size where it's very difficult to affect change in the organization, right? Because there's so many locations. But the other side of that is the friction probably makes you think longer about the adjustments. When I had just one, I constantly change shit. And I never really thought about, like, is this going to have an overall impact? I just did it. 90% of it was a total waste of my time. It was a waste of my team's effort, but I was learning. I was iterating over time. But I would assume from your vantage point, even though you don't get to change little things day in and day out, you do have the mental exercise of having to determine whether that little thing is going to translate to a big impact. And so
yeah.
What is that vetting process? Because again, anything you change at this stage in the game is going to be an undertaking. There's going to be cost associated. There's going to be time associated.
Well, I think it's, we're pretty bullish on this idea of suburban casual dining, right? Like prior to COVID, everybody was really focused on QSR, coffee, fast food because of operational ease, right? So all of these restaurant groups and investment funds were like, well, it's easier to operate a Five Guys burgers and fries than a Perdita kitchen. So let's just build a lot of those. And, the scary thing that happened is like so much disruption occurred during COVID. So what's happening now? Well, all those people who doubled down on coffee and fast food are now like, wait a minute, because of safety of dining, they're seeing this crazy artificial growth. So let's double down. other things occurring, right? People are moving from the urban core to suburban markets around the country because we're seeing a change in habit. We just learned for the first time how to actually remote work. And so that opens up just a whole new style of life. So then you're in historic, beautiful suburban communities where they haven't had any disruption to casual dining, since Outback, which were great brands, great brands, but it's not like the urban core. And I do think a lot of multi-concept groups are attracted to the urban core because they can play around with or new concepts, new brands, new styles of dining. But there is something beautiful in like, how do we transform the style of dining that has existed for generations and generations? So from an overarching, like, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, it's like, I think there's incredible opportunity to disrupt casual dining around suburban America. I mean, it's like, even when you think about it, how many competitors can you name to Chick-fil-A, right? How many competitors can you really name to Olive Garden that are competing at scale in those markets around the country? So I think there's this just huge market gap. And I think there's a lot of other stuff that compounds on that thesis. So I think for the first time, we've got to just be focused and be like, dude, and I don't think, when COVID came, I was like, oh my God, table service is done for the rest of eternity. Think about the reactions we had when COVID hit. It was like, oh, no one's ever going to use like, we're never going to have a server again. We're never going to do X, Y, and Z. And now my mind's like, holy shit, everything's going to be automated everywhere you look in your life. You're going to be driven to work. You're going to like barely have to work because AI is going to run all the models. Like, you're going to have all this time. And what are you going to do? You're going to go enjoy dining together as family because it's such a community bonding experience. So now my thought is like, well, let's not distract from that focus. Let's just figure out how to make it better and figure out different ways to optimize it as we scale. So to your question, there's going to be layers where we improve sequence of service. We bring on new levels of technology. We make, changes to operational flow. We shrink the footprint. We bring in automation in the kitchen. Like, all those things are going to happen, right? But we want to move at the speed that we see Chili's and these organizations move, not at the way that I was moving when I was young in my career, where I was like, I just want to transform technology in restaurants, right? Because, you heard it, you hear it on all great podcasts around this AI wars. It's like, dude, it's a spending battle. Like, no one's going to be able to compete. So focus on what you can compete on. So yes, I think we'll be able to, I do think we're an organization that can pivot, can make adjustments. I'm pretty bullish on the path that we're going. Yeah.
Let's talk about AI. So, I coach a bunch of restaurant owners and operators. And I'm always pushing AI. I'm like, are you using ChatGPT? Are you paying for the premium? Are you doing this thing? And the question I get again and again and again is, I don't know when to use it. Like, I don't know. And I'm over here saying, for everything. I mean, I talk to the machine constantly, but it is still, and I believe, especially on an independent scale, like chronically underutilized. And you said, I haven't written a performance review in the past 6 months. I've literally put all of my data into an AI model and said, write a performance review of this person. And I'm doing the best work I've ever done. And it's taking me 50% of the time. And so I would ask you, how are you leveraging AI to get the most done that you can possibly do? Improve the quality of the work with half the effort.
Well, I still remember the day I heard about ChatGPT. I went into one of our lead investors and I was talking about the roadmap for our technology company. And he basically looked at me like I had no idea what I was talking about. And he's like, have you seen these new large language models and how they can write code and so on? And I guess that was in 23. So since then, maybe that was 22, December of 22. But after that, I just became borderline obsessed of like, I'm such a believer in how these tools can support small independent groups, going back to what we talked about previously, which is like the amount of skills necessary to be successful is insane. First off, we don't have backgrounds in development, so we're out the gates probably picking the wrong real estate. Then, we probably haven't evaluated market demand. So it's like, is there even demand for the cuisine that we're going to even serve, right? Because there's two thought processes, like, hey, I want to push my culinary dream on the city versus, or it's like, what do people actually demand? Where is the market gap, and how can I fill a cuisine within that? Um, so, since then, one organization I would recommend to listeners is the Vijal Institute or Vijal AI. They have an unbelievable CEO empowerment course. But since that day where that investor reached out to me and shared the power, I've legitimately tried to use it for everything. And early on, it was taking longer to complete certain tools or certain projects, but now the speed has transformed. And I think the biggest takeaway that I have from the first 2 years, because our applications in the first 2 years are going to change for our applications in the next 2 years, right? Models are going to become more advanced. There's going to be more automation. It's going to be solving different problems. So for the last 2 years, I've really just focused on using it as a thought partner, peer review, a tutor. You know how hard it is for a young leader or any leader for that matter, to go to his boss and be like, can you provide feedback on this work I'm doing? I really want to exceed your expectations. But now being able to ChatGPT's up right now because I'm like, what kind of questions is he going to ask me and what answer should I have for him? But the first 2 years, the amount I learned about real estate development, better underwriting, how to put better raise decks together, what key components are missing. I've got I built a bot just for myself, and I've got personality tests. I have my whole childhood history. I have my whole work. Anything that exists about me is plugged into this model, and it's a perfect reflection. So I can use it as a life coach. I can use it as, hey, I'm interacting with this person. Should I change my approach? So I think if you are a restaurant group and you're not using it, Elon said it best. He's like, dude, organizations that use AI are going to beat organizations that don't. This is the time now to train your teams, equip them all. Because the last 2 years, I really focused on my own performance improvement. That can't be the way we build our organization. We have to be an AI first organization. So actually this past Monday was the first time we did an entire class, full day class with an executive coach to teach our entire office team of like, hey, here are different ways to use existing bots today. Here are functions that could, be powerful. And it was just eye-opening, right? Very few people have even been trained on how do you put together a great prompt. Another thing that I heard in the last week is like, it's going to be there's going to be more single person company billionaires than you've ever seen before.
I agree wholeheartedly.
So it's like, yeah. And what I love about it from a hospitality standpoint is like, we need to invest everything in ops. Like operations are the differentiator. And AI is not new. We've always basically had the rule book to run a great restaurant. But do we have the discipline to go in day in after day and be like, dude, are we adhering to the plan? Am I holding you accountable? Did I drive home versus swing by the restaurants to check on the cleanliness? So my feeling with AI is like, no longer is creativity needed and the roadmap is written. Do you have the grit to wake up every day and execute on the plan? Because from a creative function, like there's no marketing person that can be more creative than that if it has the right context. So I think it's train the teams, get everyone up and use it, build a culture of sharing that's like, dude, this is actually how I plugged it into a model. Here's some insights that I found. Here's a way, because it's still all so new. And in the last week, new tools have come out, right? Even seeing Cloud be able to navigate, a computer desktop. Like one of the best ways it was shared with me was like, it's just the transformation of an operating system. And we're going from, first it was, keyed entry on a computer, then it was a mouse, then it was touch, and now it'll be voice. And so how is that going to change our daily workflow? But hypothetically, we should be able to get incredible output from the corporate structure and be able to reinvest throughout the organization and the people that really make the difference at the store level.
Knowing what I know now, I could have accomplished literally everything I have ever accomplished in my life in half the time for half the money. It's just, it's the hurdles, the mistakes, all of the lessons learned. What can I learn from your mistakes? What can we learn from your life history? If you were to go back and do it all over again, spend half the money and half the time, what would you do differently in growing this restaurant group?
I think I would build a support structure sooner. I think that goes without saying. It's hard because you build humility over time through your mistakes, and most of the painful lessons are associated with that. I think first off, I wouldn't be on the leading edge. I'd be a fast follower. There's so much we're always focused. We're never going to make it unless we're innovation, but innovation is so expensive and it's not what pays the bills. Um, Clearly, my biggest issue throughout my career has been focusing on things that aren't actually driving value. I recently read a book, The Goal, and it just was it was such a good tool to remember that like the main purpose of this restaurant organization is to build a profitable restaurant company. So anything that you are doing that isn't driving towards that core objective is just wasting your capacity. It's wasting your team's capacity. So I'd say it's easy to look back on the countless mistakes I've made from, not doing any real estate due diligence and opening a restaurant, from having no clarity how to put together capital raises to, to making mistakes, to investing in stores without talking to the community first. I remember the first restaurant we opened up in this beautiful arts community in Denver. And I was, 27 years old at the time. And I was like, I think people like sports. So let's like put jerseys all over this restaurant. And then we opened this restaurant. And I remember there were people who put together a campaign that was get the bros out of Rhino. And so I think it's like, I think the biggest lesson is just learning to listen and to be patient. And like, I think the other big lesson for me is like, just enjoying the ride. For so much of my career, I've been like, I won't achieve happiness until this next goal is achieved. But then you get there and then you're focused on the next one. And then you have these beautiful memories, but I don't necessarily know if you were present to enjoy them. So feel thankful to keep building. Hopefully hopefully us and the team will I'll keep them less distracted from making the same mistakes. And keeping the investments on what's actually working versus what we think what should work. I forget the saying, but it's like invest your time in today, plan for tomorrow, and only make weird, crazy bets on the future. It's like, I think when I started, it was like, I'm going to make crazy bets on the future. And if I make enough of them, something's going to work. But I need to I think changing that thinking and being like, invest in today, invest in running the best possible restaurant in Westminster, Parker, Castle Rock, Colorado Springs, wherever it may be, and let that open up the doors. Because it's like irrelevant if Chick-fil-A had 10 restaurants or 10,000 restaurants today. They had the store level performance at that 10. They would have the opportunity to build as many as they wanted. So, I think being so focused on the future and not being present for the day, and I think that comes at the cost of the guest experience. When you're so focused on strategy and like, where's the next, how am I going to expand and market entry and X, Y, and Z? It's like you're so far away from the problem.
What should we steal from you? Like, what are the tactics, the tools, the strategies that you've used consistently throughout your life that have served you well, that if we internalized it, we'd enjoy the same benefit?
I am a big believer in mental and physical health. And so that's been a big part, especially, one of my, recently drastically reduced consumption of alcohol, and it's had probably the biggest impact on my life. I think in this industry, alcohol is so hard, right? You have so much pain, you spend so much time alone, and we use it as a numbing tool. And I think recently in the last 6 months, I've realized I've realized that has been the biggest ceiling on my future. So I think putting your mental health as number one, and that can drastically be done by reducing what you're doing. It's amazing how quickly you can clean a schedule if you want to. So I say for me that's been great, and probably one of the most impactful things. And always be a student. The second we think we have the answer is when it might be too late. We can learn from everywhere, and we need to remember to be open to that.